Hello everybody, welcome to Allan Walls Photography. This is Alan and today is the last day of 2020 and I'm glad to report that at the very last minute something good happened, and that was Keith Garnham, friend and member of the Norwich and District Photographic Society, got a StackShot for Christmas. Anyway, Keith became the third person to get in touch with me since Christmas to ask for a little bit of guidance on how to set up and configure the StackShot. So what I'm going to do over the next two videos is just that. In this video, we're going to concentrate on the configuration settings, and in the second video, we'll get into the various program modes. The difference between an automated rail and a manual rail is the manual rail is driven by your hand, hence the manual part, and an automated rail is driven by a stepper motor. A stepper motor is not a typical DC motor. It's a fairly elegant piece of equipment. It consists of a series of electromagnets that surround a central rotor. And as you energize these various magnets, the central core will rotate, and it can do so in very, very specific, very, very small fractions of a rotation, which is exactly what you need to operate a focus stacking rail. The problem is that in order to drive a stepping motor, you need some kind of a processor, some kind of a computer to generate the correct signals to drive the device. So if you're building one yourself, you'll usually have to program your own computer chip. This is a little Arduino board that I use when I'm playing with stepping motors. Even that's not enough. You also need something called a driver, a stepper driver, that takes the signals, the low voltage signals coming from the Arduino board, and basically converts them into higher voltage pulses that go to the motor to actually cause it to move. Obviously, that's a fairly complicated deal, building and setting one of these things up, which is why the idea of getting a pre-built, completely programmed rail is so appealing. And probably the gold standard in that world of automated focus rails is the Cognisys StackShot. One of the reasons pre-built rails like the StackShot is so appealing and so popular with macro photographers is because they've done all of the hard work. They've put together a controller box that contains a properly programmed microprocessor, along with a stepper driver and a screen to interface with so that you can give the controller instructions, and it takes care of everything else. It will run the rail according to the parameters you set for it. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through all of the configuration settings. That's the settings you put in when you first get your StackShot. You may end up with more than one configuration that you want to use, but we'll start with the basic configuration and show you how to set all that up. So with no further ado, let's jump straight into the StackShot. So when you initially plug in your StackShot, there'll be a very brief welcoming screen that just says StackShot and shows the revision of the software that you're using. That will quickly go away and it'll be replaced by the shooting menu. But before we talk about the shooting menu, let's go into the configuration. This is what you would do the first time you set your rail up to use. Now, there are 7 buttons on the front of the controller: an up and down button on the left, a select configuration, then a forward and backward on the right, and then a shutter release button on the bottom right. So when you first plug your StackShot in and you want to set it up, the first thing you need to do is go to the configuration menu. This is where you put your preferences in. If you just hit the configuration button one time, this global configuration menu will open. And from this interface, we can set everything that we need to customize the device for the way we want to use it. Now, I'm going to walk you through the settings that I have and explain why I have them so that you can understand why yours might be different. The first line is number of pictures. This is the number of times the shutter is released during that pause in the rail's movement. So it'll move, fire a picture, wait, fire another picture, and then move on. The reason I have it set to 2 is I like to use mirror up mode on my cameras. So the first shutter release raises the mirror, and then I allow a little time to pass for the vibration to settle down, and then the second picture on the controller is actually the shutter release, and after that's done, the rail moves on. The second line is T-settle, that is the settle time. That means how much time do you want to pass after the rail has moved to its next location before it takes the picture. The default setting for the settle time is half of a second, 500 milliseconds, which doesn't seem like much. My preference is to use a little bit longer, up to about 2 seconds, to give everything time to settle down. But there are a couple of reasons you will want to go with a higher time settle, like I have here. Mine is set up at 5 seconds. That is for 2 reasons. The first is I very often am using a very substantial load on my StackShot, meaning I have a PB6 bellows, a full frame camera, a heavy lens, and whatever else you add to the system, maybe a flash trigger, it all adds up. The more you have on your rail and the higher that load is carried, the more likely it is to continue to vibrate for a little bit longer. That's one reason. The second is my macro cage flashes are approaching the end of their natural life, and they have become a little unreliable in terms of recycling time. So I have built in considerable extra time to allow my flashes to recharge. The next line is T off. This is time off, and this only matters when you have more than one picture selected. If, like me, you have 2 pictures selected, what the T off is the time between the shutter releases. So there are 2 seconds set up in my device between the raising of the mirror and the release of the shutter. I found that to be a nice, safe, long period for any vibrations to die down, and it gives me another 2 precious seconds of recharge time for my flashes. So by hitting select, we can move to the next menu item, which is load save settings. The StackShot lets you save up to 10 different configuration groups, and it's nice to be able to just select a particular group of settings that you use regularly. So if we hit the up or down button to enter that menu, there will be a sub-menu with 2 other choices: load configuration and save configuration. This is where you pull up a configuration you've made previously, or you add a new one to the memory, and you have 10 that you can work with. If you hit the up button to open load configuration, you'll see that I have number 1 is 10x DCR 150. That's just my shorthand telling me that these particular configuration settings will work best when I'm shooting at 10 times magnification using a DCR 150 as a relay lens. Now, by pressing the up and down button, I can go to all the other configurations that I've previously loaded. So my second configuration I've named 4x fin, which is 4 times finite. You of course can name yours anything you want, but this is how I like to keep track of them. So let's go back to the load save settings, and if we enter there again, and this time move down to save configuration and press the up button to open it, you can see that 1 already has a saved configuration in it. By using the up and down buttons, I can go to the next configuration that's empty. Here's one that's empty, number 3. So if I wanted to, let's say I wanted some settings to use every time I used a 1-to-1 macro lens, all you have to do is select, and that will put a cursor right next to the number 3. So you use the up and down keys to move you from 0 up to 9 and then from A to Z. Select the letter and then hit the select button to move to the next spot. If you go too far, use the down button, it'll take you backwards. We'll just save it as MA. When you're done, hit the select button and keep pressing it. Once it gets to the end of the line, it's automatically saved. And if you hit the configuration button, you can exit the menu. So that's how you add new configurations to your list. All right. Let's hit configuration again to get back into the global configuration menu, and we'll hit select to scroll to the next line, which is auto return, yes or no. Auto return is a very useful feature that I actually do use. I don't know why that is turned off. When your last image in the stack is taken, the rail will return to its starting position. So I recommend you put that on yes. The next item on the menu is speed. Your options range from 1/2 millimeter all the way up to 5 millimeters per second. The faster you move the rail, the less torque the motor produces, which means if you use a very heavy load on your rail, it's prone to act up at high speeds. So if you're using a heavy load, bellows, big heavy camera, other accessories up there, you're probably better off sticking with a lower speed. I recommend about 1 millimeter per second is a safe place to start. The next item on the menu is T-lapse, and that is what it sounds like, time lapse. You can set this anywhere from 1/10 of a second, 100 microseconds, all the way up to 24 hours. That is your range. And what that means is you can set the device up to shoot a stack, return to the beginning, and wait for this time lapse to expire, and then it will shoot another stack. For example, if you wanted to shoot a wilting flower, this would be the way you would do it. You'd set it up and you'd have the images taken 1 hour apart, and it would shoot a fresh stack every time your T-lapse ran out. Worth knowing. We hit select, get down to T-pulse. T-pulse is the amount of time the StackShot is sending the signal to your shutter release in your camera to fire the shutter. 500 milliseconds is way more than enough. I would just leave it on 500 milliseconds. If for any reason you encounter missed shutter releases, in other words, the rail moves, the camera stops, and then it doesn't fire the shutter, that may be related to your T-pulse, and you might want to increase that amount of time so the signal is being sent a little bit longer if there's an issue with your camera. Otherwise, leave it on 500 milliseconds. That is plenty. The next item on the menu is tramp. T-ramp, it's the ramp time. It's StackShot's term for acceleration. That's one of the beautiful things about using stepper motors is you can program how fast they accelerate to speed and then how fast they decelerate when they stop. It makes for smoother operation and less jolting around of the camera. So it's not jumping to full speed and suddenly stopping, both of which will cause more vibration than you want. I think the default acceleration is set at 1 second. That means it takes 1 second after the motor starts before it is running at the speed that you have already set. And that's plenty of acceleration. It's enough to take the edge off the vibrations. It doesn't add any time to the total stack, and it's long enough to prevent vibrations. The next item on the menu is units, and you can choose here whether you want to use mils, which are thousandths of an inch, or if you're more comfortable, you can use metric in millimeters, which is what I regularly use. There's a third option to choose, and that is steps. When you have it on this setting, it is going to give you all of your distances in steps. Unless you're an engineer and you think in terms of steps when it comes to one of these motors, you're probably better off sticking with something familiar like mils or millimeters. The next setting is torque, and your options run from 1 to 10, with 1 being the least torque, 10 being the most. Torque is an interesting thing. It's inversely proportional to the speed of the rail, and the only reason you would want more torque is if you're trying to move a heavier load. So if your rail is struggling under the weight of your camera and bellows and whatever else you have mounted, one thing you might want to do is increase the torque. Now, if you're trying to run this thing in the field using batteries, be aware torque chews up a lot of power. In fact, it's one of the other interesting things about stepper motors is they use more current to stay still than they do to move. In fact, the faster they move, the less current they use. Amazing, but that's the way they work. So unless you have a specific reason to increase the torque, I recommend leaving it at 5. The next item on the menu is high precision, and I recommend you just leave it off. What high precision does is it changes the step size that are produced by the built-in stepper driver, allowing the device to move your carriage all the way down to 1 micron per step, which, unless you're shooting with 50 or 60 times objectives, it's unlikely that you're going to need that a whole lot. One clue that high precision is something you want to leave off is because when you turn it on, the motor starts making a growling, rattling noise, which will continue as long as it's on high precision. So unless you absolutely need 1 micron steps, I would leave this turned off. The last thing on the menu is LCD backlight. It goes all the way from 1 to 10. At 1, you can't see the screen. This is 10. It doesn't get very bright, and I don't really see any reason to fiddle with it. It's never going to put out enough light to mess with your shot. I guess possibly if you were shooting continuous light, in low light, it might, but otherwise, I just leave it on 10 because it's easier to see. So that's the configuration menu. You'd go through it, set your StackShot up, and you'll be good to go unless you decide you want to change some settings and maybe save that new configuration. This will remain in the StackShot even when you turn it off. So even without power, it'll remember what your configuration settings are. To get out of the configuration menu, hit the configuration button again, and it'll take you to the shooting menu. But let me tell you about one other nifty thing. If you press and hold the configuration button, it'll open the advanced menu. The first option, distance per revolution, completely baffles me. To the best of my knowledge, the motor, the stepper motor on your rail and the carriage that holds your camera are mechanically coupled. I do not understand how by increasing or decreasing the amount of movement of the sled per revolution, you can change that relationship. So I've reached out to Cognisys to get them to explain this. I asked years ago and never heard back from them because this has always baffled me. So I recommend you leave it at whatever it's set to. Backlash, however, is important. As you know, whenever you move a rail, manual or automatic, and then you stop and move it in the other direction. So whenever you change direction, there is a little bit of play. This setting is in case the amount of backlash control that has been programmed into the box is too much or not enough for your particular setup. I think it normally is set actually at 220 microns. That means you bring your rail all the way back to the start to shoot a stack. It'll first take a picture. Then the first time it moves, it's going to move whatever your step length is, say 40 microns, and then it's going to add 220 microns to that to take up any slack. so that if it's set perfectly, it will move only your step length. The problem with mine is when it's set at 220, my carriage moves about 140 microns when I have it set at 40 microns. So it's over by about 100. So what I would do would be use the down key to drop the value to about 120. And by dropping it to 120, it will hopefully get much closer to giving me an accurate first step. It is really frustrating. Take the whole series of images and you find that the first part of the antenna or whatever is not in focus because the backlash control moved right through that area without stopping to take a picture. So if you run into that problem, come to this menu and you can simply reduce the amount of backlash compensation and then save it, and you won't have that problem anymore. So that's about everything you need to know when it comes to configuring your new StackShot. Now, how you use the thing is a different matter, and in the next video I'm going to go through the 7 program modes that are available with the StackShot, and I'll teach you what they mean and how to use them. If you'd like to get some more information on what we've been talking about today, please check out the article on my website. The link is right here, and I'll also put it in the show notes. If you go over there, you'll find more details and some links to where you can purchase one if you so desire. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking, subscribing, ringing the bell, all the things you do. I will be back soon, and this time I know what I'll be doing. I'll be doing the second half of this video, so that should be out within a day or two. Until then, stay safe, be well. Happy New Year.